Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, for session 6, titled Using Templates and Outlines to Set the Stage for Backward Design. I'm Judith Sebesta, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Digital Higher Education Consortium of Texas. And please note that closed captioning is available. You just need to click on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, I'll quickly introduce our speaker. Our presenter today is Dr. Melissa Laird, who serves as an instructional designer, formerly for Texas Wesleyan University, but now she's moved across town to Texas Christian University, where she serves as an instructional designer. Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's great to be here. Yes, so today we'll talk about templates and outlines that can hopefully help you set the stage for backward course design when you're working either on developing courses you might be teaching yourself or working with faculty to help them design a new course or work through a QM review. A quick overview, so we'll go over some basic principles of traditional versus backward design principles. Then we'll move on to talking about common challenges to using backward design, and then for the meat of the presentation, I'll share some different outlines and templates that my team and I, when I was at Texas Wesleyan, that we put together that helped us work with faculty when developing either new course designs or also working through course reviews. So when we first meet with faculty that we're working with, I usually like to kind of talk to them about, how they've developed, if it's a course they developed themselves, how they went about developing the course. And what I've found a lot in working with faculty is that a lot of times they use a more traditional design process, which is, identifying a subject or topic and a chunk of content that they need to cover, and spreading those out throughout the semester, and then planning lessons to cover that content, and then ultimately creating tests or other assessments that evaluate the lesson content that they covered. And I'll be fully transparent in saying that when I started teaching in higher ed, I was teaching before I became an instructional designer, and now having trained as an instructional designer and gone through QM certifications, I've switched from kind of that traditional design process to using the backward design process. So when I work with faculty a lot, we have that conversation about, well, how do you think about building your course? How have you built it in the past? And then it's usually that traditional route. And so then I talk to them about comparing and contrasting, okay, well, this is the more traditional design process. What if we reimagined it and we started at the end, and we started by identifying what those learning outcomes are, and what are the end goals? What do you most want your students to learn at the end of the course and be able to take with them after your course is over? And then we talk about, I'm so sorry, is there a question? So after we identify those learning outcomes, then we talk about what kind of assessments would most speak to those outcomes? What kind of assessments are going to ensure that those learning outcomes are actually met? Or, is it a project? Is it some sort of, what does that assessment look like? And then we talk about the lessons and the content that will prepare students for those assessments that will speak directly to those outcomes. So some of the challenges that frankly, some of the challenges I had when I first switched from that more traditional design process to using backward design, and then also a lot of the same challenges I had are the same as the challenges many of the faculty I work with have also experienced. So first, it's the lack of familiarity with backward course design. When working with faculty who have done that more traditional kind of chronological building, they just might not even be familiar with backward design at first. So it's kind of going over maybe a comparing and contrasting traditional versus backward, and then talking about what backward, what it might look like to actually do backward design. And then it's a matter, once they gain that familiarity, then a matter of breaking those old habits. And it really is kind of it's a switch, especially, if you're a professor who has maybe designed a lot of your courses and designed, many courses using that more traditional layout, it really is, part of it is breaking the habit of doing that, and forcing us to think about starting at the end, starting with those learning objectives, ensuring they're measurable and what have you, and then doing assessments and then doing content. So it's breaking that habit. And then it's also, it's also a matter of giving up the idea that the order has to follow the textbook necessarily. The order might line up perfectly with the textbook, but not always. So that's kind of another challenge that I see a lot, is this idea that, the content has to follow the order of the textbook, or the content has to follow the same order that it did the last time the course was taught. And so it's kind of, using the course design process, using, a QM review to take a step back and be like, let's reimagine this. Like, this is an exciting time. It's a time of work for sure, but it's an exciting time. Like, we can take a step back and think about what we want those end goals to be, and then we work backwards from there. Another common concern that I hear from faculty I work with, and one I had myself when I first started using backward design, were time concerns. I've heard faculty say, I just don't have time to start at the end. I'm trying to get through things, one chunk at a time, one unit at a time, and I'm doing the best I can to just build it out as we're going. And so one thing that I always try to reassure faculty of is, it is going to take a little bit more time to build things out in, on the front end, but it's going to save you a lot of time on the back end. And using backward design also ensures that the content that you're including and the assessments that you're including are really more focused towards those end goals and towards those learning objectives. And so then the content that you do take the time to build out is a lot more streamlined and a lot more tailored. And it's ultimately going to be more engaging for students and more useful for students if everything's aligned and it's all lining up nicely towards those end goals. But in either case, whatever the concerns are, if it's a matter of breaking that habit of building things chronologically, or following textbook or previous course order, outlines and templates can really help. Having an outline or a template can help faculty see what they need to build out and kind of take it bit by bit, especially if it's a new process for them. So the first thing that I usually do with faculty, after we talk about the idea of backward design and what this course design process is really going to look like, I usually talk to them about a course goals questionnaire. And so that questionnaire is really a time for them to kind of take a step back and think about some questions like, what do you most want your students to get out of the course? What do you envision your students doing with what they learn? What are they going to take with them? What are the key concepts you ultimately want them to understand? What are the actions you want them to be able to do after the course is over? So it's really kind of a time to take a step back and think about, pie in the sky, what do you want? Like, what are your goals for this class? And if you've taught the class previously, what have been the barriers to reaching those goals? This is a time to take a step back and think about, how we can shake things up and do it differently. So I'll show you this first resource I have. Hopefully you guys can see it. You should be able to. So this is an example of a course goals questionnaire that my team and I at my last institution worked on developing. And this is something, in the first meeting that we have when we're doing, if it's a new course design or if it's a course review, we usually ask our faculty to fill out this. And it's really something that they do ideally before that first meeting with the instructional designer that's working with them. And so they take a step back and they think about, if you had free reign and an endless amount of time, who does? But if you did, what would this course look like? Ask them some other questions about, characteristics of students expected to enroll in the course. What knowledge do you expect them to have coming in with? If you all are familiar with the TILT, transparency and learning and teaching, if you're familiar with that model, we talk to them a lot about, for any assessment that you have, what kind of skills are expected of them? What are they going to have to do to meet the assessments that you're giving them? So we kind of use this to kind of broadly set the stage for some different topics that we'll be talking to them about throughout the design process. We ask them, what do you want students to know, be able to do, or have experience as a result of taking the course? So we really talk about, those end goals and what faculty might want once the course is over. So we begin at the end. We start with, outcomes of the course and go from there. So, sorry. The next resource I'll share with you is the development timeline that we usually use with faculty. So the next, in that initial meeting, we talk about their responses to that questionnaire that I just showed you. We also usually talk to them about the development timeline. And so we fill out, our instructional designers usually fill out a development timeline, and it has columns like, the date or the week that, given work is going to take place. And then it lists out what faculty are expected to have done by that week, and then what the instructional designer will have done that week. And so it's very detailed, and this kind of, and this can be adjusted, throughout the design, and it inevitably always is adjusted throughout the design process, depending on, professors' workload, ID's workload, or, life, things that happen. But having this timeline and giving it to faculty up front kind of helps alleviate, any kind of anxiety there might be about, like, oh, how am I going to have time? When am I going to do these things? Like, how am I going to have time to fit this in? And so we kind of map this out together in the first meeting between instructional designer and professor, and that kind of does alleviate some anxiety. So this is just a clip, screen grab of the first, column and row, but I will show you that full document and what that kind of looks like. So again, we usually have, the date of when assignments, and this changes to semester, of course, but we usually have the weeks. So we number out how many weeks it's, the whole design or review is expected to take. And then we have, items that are going to be discussed at the meeting, action items that have to be taken care of after the meeting, and then we map it out between, faculty and instructional designer. I'll also take a second to say, having these different kinds of documents, like, the questionnaire that I showed you, or the development timeline, or the other resources I show you, it's really handy to have shared documents like this, and to build everything out in these documents before the instructional designers start plugging things into the LMS, because then it's these working documents that are shared that can be used to flesh everything out and kind of hash out ideas before things get plugged into the LMS. That way there aren't, well, first of all, that way there's a record of all the work that takes place. And then second of all, it just makes it a lot easier when building things in the LMS, if it's decided beforehand. So the next thing I'll show you are different options for outlines or blueprints, planning documents used to map out the content assessments and to check alignment across content assessments and objectives. So I usually like to give the professors I work with a few different, similar but slightly different, iterations of these course outlines, depending on if their program has program objectives, or different kinds of outlines just might make more sense to one person versus another. We all visualize things slightly differently, and we all plan things out slightly differently. So I like to give a few different options for this. I'll show you that. Okay, so this first one, is a very broad course outline, and so it contains, we start with program learning objectives, and then we start with course learning objectives, and we hash these out, make sure things are measurable, QM standards, and we make sure they're scaffolded, they get harder as they advance on 1 through 6, that kind of thing. And then it goes into course units or modules, depending on if it's a 7 versus a 15-week course. And then we kind of give them a little breakdown of what kind of information they'll want to include for, if it's an assessment versus the learning activity versus instructional materials. And we kind of explain, what we mean by each of those categories. And then, we like for them to include the title of, if it's a unit, so if it's a 15-week course, they'll have modules divided into chunks, into units. So we like for those to have title for the unit, and then usually a brief unit description and objectives for the unit. And then we go from there with modules, and then of course we have the assessments, and then the learning activities and instructional tools that align with the assessment, and then any other instructional materials that align with activities and with the assessment. So some other different iterations that planning outline are shown here. So you should be able to see this document now. So I like to give them this document, and I usually tell faculty that I'm working with in that first meeting, as long as the information, the necessary information, like, is included, however it's arranged, that can be up to the professor. It's really what makes sense for them. So in option A, this would be a good template to use if they had learning objectives, or program learning objectives, excuse me. So they would start with, program learning objectives. They would make sure their course learning objectives were aligned with program. And then they would go on to unit or module, depending on the length, make sure those are aligned with course, and so on. They'd have learning resources, assessments. Or if they don't have program learning objectives, it would just be, unit or module objectives and course objectives, learning resources, assessments. Or some faculty I've worked with, they really like to, when they're planning this out, they want to also think about, maybe you're working with a faculty member who really likes to think about due dates, and I think some of that's a layover for us, is kind of a hangover from that more traditional, like, chronological planning order, which is okay. It's okay to, if they want to think about the due dates or the points they want to assign as they're thinking about, their learning objectives and the content and the assessment, that's okay. If that makes sense for them, then that's fine. So this is an option that they can include for that. Or you might have a faculty member who really just likes to start, brain dumping ideas in a Word document. That's okay too. You can still kind of brain dump into a Word document and still apply backward design principles. So maybe they have a unit and they want to list the title out here, not in table form. That's okay. Maybe they have their description under that. They have their ULOs listed, and then they go on to the next unit, and so forth. So those are some different, just a few different options that hopefully, might be helpful to you and the faculty you're working with. And then I'd be very interested to know if you have templates that have worked well for your institution, or templates that have worked well with your instructional designers or faculty that you're working with. I would love to hear about that. And then if you also have any questions for me, or would like to collaborate, or if you'd like to receive copies of any of these templates that we've kind of mapped out, I'm very happy to share those.
Dr. Laird, thank you so much. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and I'm the only one who's been chatting with myself, I guess.
Okay.
I appreciated the way you framed the hangover from traditional design. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, I was a faculty member for 15 years, and I never had the ability to work with an instructional designer until the very end of that period, whenever I did work on QM certification and worked with an instructional designer on that. But that was really towards the end of my professorial career. So I have such great appreciation for what you do, and the thoroughness, from the timelines, the questions that you have to guide faculty. It's just really impressive. If anybody wanted to unmute themselves, if you had any specific question or comments, we still have about 5 minutes, or I'm sure no one would be upset if we did end the session earlier, but let me just pause and see if you have any questions or comments that you want to express verbally or place in the chat. Oh, Linda Reed. Oh, Linda, thank you. Are faculty required to work with an instructional designer to teach online there?
Yes. So at West, and again, so I was at Wesleyan, and now I'm down the road at TCU. In either case, yes. Our faculty are required to work with instructional designers anytime if it's an in-person class that's being offered online for the first time. We require them to work with collaboratively with an instructional designer. And we really like to emphasize, instructional designers are not gatekeepers. They're not, it's really collaborative, and, we're just there to assist, with the design process. They're required to work with an ID if it's the first time a course is being offered online, or if it's a course that has fallen below a certain threshold as far as drop fails or withdrawals. Then we like to do a review process and just kind of use that time to take a step back, do a QM, kind of review, and see what we might be able to do differently to help the course improve further.
I know you often have to reassure faculty that you are not the subject matter expert and you understand that.
Yes.
Honors are so great about explaining that and reassuring faculty. Amy Gates asked, do you have an online teaching certification program there for online faculty?
Yes, at Texas Wesleyan, there was something we called it FOOT. It was called Fundamentals of Online Teaching. And then at TCU, we use a similar online training program where faculty, depending on if they're teaching asynchronously or synchronously, they're kind of two different tracks where we kind of like to tailor it to whatever method the instructors might be using. But in either case, yes.
Excellent, that makes sense. And Linda also has another good question. Is there an internal review process or a SME subject matter expert check?
Yes, anytime. Yes, and we do that anytime a course falls below the a certain DFW drop fail withdrawal threshold. There is an internal review that we do with faculty.
Great questions, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the questions.
Any other questions, comments? Linda and Amy said, thank you. Maybe you're watching that yourself, Dr. Laird. Well, I guess without further questions, then Dr. Laird, thank you so much for that. Just really good, I think, in-depth, as much as you could in 25 minutes, information about what you're doing as an instructional designer there at Texas Wesleyan and Texas Christian. So thank you so much. And I think it's a great transition into our final plenary for the Texas Quality Matters Consortium Connections Conference. And we're going to get to hear from Quality Matters themselves about data and research. So everybody go and take a quick break, and hopefully I'll see you in the final plenary.
Thank you so much.
Again, Melissa. Everybody take